Russia is furious. F-16s are now ripping through Ukrainian skies, and Putin's worst fear is becoming reality. He thought he could contain the threat. He thought cruise missiles and glide bombs would ground Ukraine's new jets. He was wrong, because in 2025 the F-16s are no longer just a symbol, they are striking back. So how did Ukraine turn the tide so quickly? It's part timing, part strategy, and part collapse. Ukraine is getting more jets, while Russia's air defenses are falling apart. On April 9th, Zona Militar shared new insight from General Christopher Cavoli, the head of US European Command. In a Senate Armed Services Committee hearing, Cavoli pulled back the curtain. According to him, the last 6 weeks have been chaos. After a brief suspension of intelligence sharing in early March, US and Ukrainian officials resumed talks. Combat coordination bounced back, and suddenly, Ukraine's F-16 fleet was in motion. More jets, better trained pilots, and most importantly, more confidence. They fly every day, Cavoli told the committee. They've neutralized a large number of cruise missile threats and have also carried out numerous offensive strikes, particularly in the east. And that's the detail Russia doesn't want to hear, because that region, Donbas, isn't just strategic, it's personal. The Donbas will be a major get for Putin. He attempted to annex the region back in 2014 when he launched his first campaign of aggression against Ukraine. When that failed, Donetsk in particular became one of his key areas of focus during his 2022 invasion. Putin's forces exerted massive pressure on the region throughout 2024. Part of the reason why Putin wants the region comes down to resources. For instance, Pokrovsk, which lies on the border between the Donbas and the rest of Ukraine, is home to a coal mine that was worth $1.8 billion before Putin invaded. The coking coal extracted from that mine is used by Ukraine to make steel. By taking Pokrovsk, Putin gets his hands on two valuable resources he can use to keep fueling his military and, in future, pump more money into the Russian coffers. The Pokrovsk mine alone provided 66% of the coking coal Ukraine's steel manufacturers used in 2024, making it a key target for Putin. But beyond resources, there is a more symbolic reason Putin wants Donbas. He views it as the closest thing to Russian territory on Ukrainian soil. It's been a predominantly Russian-speaking region since at least 2001, when a census revealed that Russian was the main language spoken by 74.9% of the Donbas's residents. Ethnic Russians are also the largest minority in the region, making up 38.2% of its population compared to 56.9% of ethnic Ukrainians. To Putin, that's enough to claim that the region is at least Russian-leading, and the fact that Donetsk was home to a Russian separatist group that Putin tried to use to claim the Donbas back in 2014 only adds to that reasoning in Putin's mind. It all adds up to Putin really wanting the Donbas. Now, according to Cavoli, Ukraine is using its F-16s to protect its territory in the region. The EUCOM head has also revealed that Ukraine is getting more F-16s. There are more F-16s prepared to be deployed there. There are more pilots in the training pipelines, he told the hearing. Crucially, he also confirms that none of the US-made fighter jets are coming from the US. None of the F-16s have been from the US, though. They're mainly coming from northern European countries, the Netherlands and Denmark. And he's not wrong. According to the Kyiv Independent, Denmark has promised to send 19 F-16s to Ukraine, the first of which arrived in the country in 2024. Norway is another potentially massive supplier, with the country having promised between 6 and 22 of the aircraft. Belgium says it's willing to provide F-16s, though it hasn't offered clarity on the numbers, and the Netherlands has marked itself out as the biggest contributor. It's going to send 24 F-16s to Ukraine. So it's clear that F-16s are starting to head into Ukraine. The question now is simple: how is Ukraine unleashing them on Russia? When Ukraine received its first batch of 6 of the US-made fighter jets in August 2024, Putin wasn't too worried. Yes, the F-16s were a marked upgrade on the Soviet-era jets Ukraine was able to field in the past. However, the first batch Ukraine received was too few in number to pose any sort of attacking threat to his forces. Ukraine wouldn't risk any of its vital air platforms on attacks because it didn't want to lose any of them. Instead, it would have to use them for defense, which suited Putin because at the time he had the resources to deliver massive drone, missile, and glide bomb assaults. More on that later. And Putin was right. The first use Ukraine found for its F-16s was intercepting Russian missile. It was far more effective than Putin ever imagined it could be. Within weeks of the first F-16s arriving in Ukraine, the jets had already been deployed successfully against one of Putin's missile barrages. Putin expected this to happen. However, he didn't expect Ukraine to get its jets into the skies so soon after receiving them. On August 27th, Defense News reported on a Russian missile onslaught that ultimately killed 5 Ukrainians, in addition to damaging several homes, residential buildings, and even a hotel. Russia also managed to take out some of Ukraine's energy infrastructure, plunging Kyiv and several other cities into power outages at a time when the heat in Ukraine was overwhelming. The damage would have been much worse were it not for the fact that this attack marked the first time Ukraine deployed its F-16s to shoot down some of Russia's missiles. More instances of F-16 defense followed, culminating in a January 7th incident when a Ukrainian F-16 pilot managed to shoot down a staggering 6 cruise missiles in a single mission. That mission was a first for the F-16, taking place during a mass Russian airstrike that saw Putin deploy 200 drones and 94 missiles. For the first time in the history of the Fighting Falcon, an F-16 fighter jet destroyed 6 Russian cruise missiles in one combat mission, blared a social media post published by Ukraine's Air Force Command. They even say that Americans couldn't believe you did it, claimed Ukraine's Air Force Command spokesperson Yuri Inhat when speaking to the pilot who had completed the brave mission. The pilot provided more details about his exploits. He said that he approached the incoming Russian missiles and managed to lock on to several of them, despite all being equipped with electronic warfare countermeasures that are supposed to prevent such targeting. The pilot shot down a pair of the incoming Russian missiles with his F-16's medium-range missiles, before taking out another 2 with his short-range missile. That should have been the end of the mission, given that the jet was only equipped with 4 missiles. And sure enough, the pilot was recalled from where he'd launched his attacks. However, as he traveled back to base, he spotted another missile heading toward Kyiv. Low on fuel and with no missiles left, the pilot moved to intercept the Russian missile. He shot it down with his F-16's cannons, scoring a direct hit, despite the missile traveling at 403 miles per hour. A few bursts from the cannon, and an explosion, then another one, the pilot explained when talking about his feat. A secondary detonation, I thought, but as it turned out, there were 2 missiles. Such feats of defense show that Ukraine was getting more comfortable with its US-made jets. They've also started to cause some severe problems for Putin. As Euromaidan Press explained in February, Ukraine's intelligent use of its F-16s as a defensive force has pushed Putin into changing his missile strike tactics. Aviation expert Anatoly Krapchinsky explains, most of the missiles were fired at one target, which makes it more challenging for air defenses to respond, he said when recounting another Russian missile strike. It's important to understand that the Russians have recently changed their tactics. There has been a reduction in the use of strategic aviation with cruise missiles like the KH-101 and KH-555. Krapchinsky continued, strange as it may sound, Russia understands that employing strategic aviation and long-range missiles is expensive. The arrival of the F-16s enables Ukraine to promptly intercept any cruise missiles in our airspace, which is why there is now a greater Russian focus on striking the front line and border regions where vulnerabilities are more pronounced. In other words, Ukraine's F-16s have been shooting so many of Russia's missiles out of the skies that Putin no longer wants to risk those he has left in his stockpiles. So he's launching fewer deep strikes against Ukraine's cities and military infrastructure. Still, if that was the only use Ukraine had found for its US-made fighter jets, Putin wouldn't have been furious. Irritated, maybe, but he can still cause damage with his altered missile tactics. However, as Ukraine has grown more confident with its F-16s, along with receiving more from its allies, it's switched its focus from defense to attack. Now, Russia's leader is fuming. Toward the end of March 2025, Ukraine released an interview with one of its F-16 pilots detailing how the country is now using its US fighter jets. Without providing specific details, the pilot said that Ukraine's F-16 pilots are now flying multiple ground attack missions over Russian-occupied territories in Ukraine, such as the previously mentioned Donbas region, every day. Ukraine is also deploying its F-16s to protect its other fighter jets, which include Russian-made Su-25, Su-24, Su-27, and MiG-29 aircraft. That means that Russia doesn't just have to worry about the F-16 as an attacking force. Ukraine has found a way to make its defensive capabilities bear offensive fruit by using its F-16s as airborne chaperones for older jets that can do damage to Russia's forces in occupied regions. Almost every missile hits its target, the pilot explained during the interview. More than 80% of the missiles we launch hit their targets, destroying both Shahid drones and cruise missiles launched from sea, air, and land. The pilot didn't reveal precisely where Ukraine is now deploying its F-16s. That makes sense. Any details would allow Putin's forces to respond. However, there have been hints that Ukraine is increasingly striking Russian targets on the ground. Beyond Kavoli's comments to the US Senate hearing, the interviewed pilot said that Ukraine's F-16s have demonstrated impressive results in combat operations against both air and ground targets. How impressive? If we want, our bomb can fly through someone's window, the pilot claimed when talking about the small-diameter bombs and JDAM-ERs Ukraine's F-16s can be equipped with. The latter is essentially a glide bomb, equipped with navigational systems to make it more precise, transforming it into a major threat to any Russian troops on the ground. We're also starting to get a drip feed of photographs and footage of Ukraine's F-16s in action. For instance, on March 20th, a video surfaced on social media that appeared to show one of Ukraine's F-16s flying low over the Sumy Oblast. That's important because Sumy is close to the Kursk region, where Russia is currently trying to push the last Ukrainian forces out of its territory following a successful counter-invasion in August 2024. It's also close to Belgorod. Zelensky has already confirmed that Ukraine is operating in that Russian oblast, likely as a response to Putin's efforts to push its soldiers out of Kursk. Ukraine may have even taken several square miles of territory in the region. That knowledge casts a new light on what the F-16 seen in Sumy may have been doing. It could have been scouting for incoming Russian missiles. Sumy was nearly overrun by Putin's forces during his initial February 2022 invasion and has become a Russian target again now that Kursk is almost retaken. Or the aircraft may have been returning from a bombing run against a Russian ground target in Kursk or Belgorod. The low-flying F-16 seen in the video clips suggests the latter. Bulgarian military says that F-16s often fly low to avoid radar detection and missile threats, suggesting Ukraine was using its F-16 to strike a ground target before fleeing the scene. Beyond all of this, we don't have many details about how Ukraine is using its F-16s. Zelensky wants to be as secretive as possible. However, Kovoli's comments reveal that Ukraine is using its US-made fighter jets in far more ways than Putin ever expected. And the news gets worse for Russia. More F-16s are coming, and they're going to be able to do even more than they are right now. We mentioned earlier that several European nations have promised large numbers of F-16s to Ukraine. However, two of those countries, Belgium and Norway, have been slow on the draw, according to Zona Militar. Despite having both promised the jets to Ukraine, neither has made any deliveries. In Norway's case, the holdup was likely down to it awaiting the arrival of a new batch of F-35s from the United States. The country didn't want to retire its F-16s, making them ready to send to Ukraine until those F-35s arrived. The new US jets are in Norway. That should mean that the country is free to transfer what it's promised to Ukraine, which could include 22 F-16 Block 10-15s, engines, support equipment, test benches, tools, maintenance materials, simulators, spare parts, manuals, and technical documents, according to the US House Foreign Affairs Committee. Those 22 jets will be a massive influx that increases Ukraine's F-16 attacking prowess. As for Belgium, Ukraine will have to wait on the country a little longer. It's promised 30 of its F-16s to support Ukraine, though none have arrived yet. It looks like none will in 2025 either, as the Belgian government claims that it has to delay the transfer. However, there is at least a vague timeline in place. On April 8th, Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever that Ukraine will receive 2 non-working F-16s from his country in 2025. That might seem useless until you realize that Ukraine can strip these older F-16s for parts to maintain the jets it currently has in the skies. As for the rest, de Wever explained why Belgium is being forced to hold back. "We hope to do more, but we are depending on the delivery of the F-35, he explained. "There is no delay in Belgium, but the F-35 has delays. Once the F-35 arrives, the F-16 leaves. It's as simple as that." So Belgium faces the same problem Norway had. Ukraine will be hoping that now the US has completed its F-35 deliveries to Norway, it can focus on giving Belgium what it needs, so that even more F-16s can fill the Ukrainian skies. This is all terrible news for Putin. As Ukraine's F-16 fleet expands, Putin's troops and armored positions will face even more attacks on the ground. But that brings us to another question. Why is Ukraine now able to use its F-16s for attack? The increasing availability of the jets to Ukraine only offers part of the answer. What it really comes down to is that Ukraine has done an excellent job of slowly destroying the threats Putin's forces posed to its F-16s, making attacking runs more viable. We already see an example of this in how Ukraine's F-16s have forced Russia to change its missile airstrike tactics. With fewer threats being posed to infrastructure deep in Ukraine, the country can now use its F-16s to go on the attack. Other Russian threats are also being dealt with. Take Putin's glide bombs as an example. These terrifying bombs, which are made by converting Russia's Soviet-era Fab dumb bombs into more precise munitions through the use of a special glide kit, have pelted Ukraine's cities throughout the war. Putin launched over 50,000 of these bombs at Ukraine up to January 2025. Now, Ukraine has figured out how to jam those bombs, according to Forbes, and it's been so effective that it now takes Russia launching between 8 and 16 of these powerful bombs at Ukraine to hit a target. Putin is being forced to burn through his glide bomb stockpiles at a far faster rate than he expected. What does that have to do with Ukraine's F-16s? It's all about threat reduction. Now that Russia is struggling to back its missile and drone strikes with glide bombs thanks to Ukraine's jamming, more F-16s are being freed up to launch devastating ground attacks against Russia's forces. It's why we're seeing the fighter jets fly over Sumy and operating in Ukraine's east. Russia is slowly running out of offensive aerial options, which opens the door for Ukraine to deploy its F-16s in an attacking capacity. Russia's aerial defenses are also being pelted. During 2025, Ukraine has scored several successful hits against Russian aerial defenses. January 6th saw Ukraine take out 3 Russian anti-air systems, a pair of Pantsir S-1s and an OSA anti-aircraft vehicle in a single attack. It followed that up by taking out its first Russian S-350 in February, along with several other strikes that have taken out S-300s and S-400s deep in Russian territory. The logic behind these types of attacks is clear. Ukraine was hesitant to unleash its F-16s as an attacking force upon first receiving them because the jets aren't immune to Russia's air defenses. The Pantsir S-1 and S-400 in particular can shoot the F-16 out of the skies if they lock onto their targets. Ukraine has used clever drone and missile strikes to take these systems out all over Russia and occupied Ukraine, creating corridors of safe airspace in which its F-16s can operate. Russians' defenses are being weakened at a time when Ukraine's aerial attacking prowess is rising. That means the F-16 offensives in the occupied eastern territories of Ukraine that Kavoli reports are just the start. In the coming months, we're likely to see Ukraine making even better use of its fighter jets as more arrive and hundreds of millions of dollars of Russian air defenses crumble. But what do you think about how Ukraine is using its F-16s? Could the jets be doing even more now than they already are? Will Ukraine's intelligent assaults on Russia's aerial defenses open up more opportunities to use its F-16s in the future? Share your thoughts with us in the comments and remember to subscribe to The Military Show for up-to-date commentary on what's happening in the Ukraine war. Now go and check out F-16s are doing the unthinkable in Ukraine. Even US pilots are stunned. Or click this other video instead.